Good afternoon, LinkedIn Live. Thank you for the opportunity to be with you today. Our brothers and our sisters in the technology world, we are honored today to have Mel Reyes. Many of you may know him as some type of important role. I know him as CIO extraordinaire. Mel, thank you so much for your time and being with us today.
Thank you, Jeff. I really appreciate this, and it's humbling to be here.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Me as well. Me as well. So we're going to talk about the customer experience. We're talking about digital transformation. We have been honored to have several thought leaders be on the show for a couple of weeks in succession now. In your experience, just where does the customer experience come from? Does that come from the CIO? Does that come from the CEO? Or where does that customer experience come from, the customer themselves?
Interestingly enough, the transformation portion of it should come from top down, right? It should come as a theme to the company wanting to service a customer at best they can, right? The requirements and how to do that usually come from the frustrations that the customer sees, the number of steps, the security models, and all those pieces. But it really comes down to the investment in the mindset, and you'll probably hear me say this about 50 times, the mindset that management has to kind of make the changes, because they either are are following an existing flow of applications, technology, or otherwise, or they're creating a new one. So if you come into it with, we want frictionless, we want passwordless, we want an experience for the user from a design standpoint, visual design standpoint, a usability standpoint, and a feature set. If you come in with that mindset and you kind of carry that through with the ability to be able to deliver quickly and in small chunks, then you become what the customer needs, right? The changes that they need, the time that it takes them to do something, to find something, gets shortened, and you can improve on that immediately. But it really is where the customer goes, right? You're seeing this with neobanks. You're seeing this with a lot of different technology versus legacy mindsets across every industry, right? 9 years ago, Allstate was pretty smart, and they bought Esurance, right? Why did they do that? Because they needed a digital footprint. They needed to kind of follow that path, right?
Yep.
Last decade or two, that's the trajectory of where everybody should be going to in order to meet the customer where they're supposed to be.
Mm-hmm. And so, and I greatly appreciate that. So how does, I always thought that the CIO was the Chief Information Officer. And in our time, what I'm learning is that's the Chief Innovation Officer. So how do you inspire change, or how do you bring that change to your financial institution?
Well, I'm glad you actually said information and innovation, because in today's market, it's more than that. Mm-hmm. It's the Chief Integration Officer, the Chief Infrastructure Officer, the Chief Intelligence Officer, and Innovation Officer, right? So, and it really falls into where you are in a maturity level and a scale in your company, right? Mm-hmm. So if you've got a good set of products, it becomes you need to innovate. If it's you're looking to get rid of legacy systems, it's maybe infrastructure and intelligence. If you're looking at partnering with other folks, it may be integration and innovation. So there's really a lot of pieces there, and the role of the CIO in the last decade or two, and you'll talk to folks in the HMG summits or in a lot of the different circuits that'll see this, has completely changed. Where before it was about dollars and cents and vendors and infrastructure and really kind of baseline core pieces. Now it's absolutely blown out of the water. It is about creating solutions for the business. And if you're a CIO and that's not your mindset, you might want to reevaluate, whether or not, somebody else is going to be knocking on your door and taking your desk, right? It really is not about putting technology in place. It's about finding what the business needs, what the customers need, and then creating solutions around that. So in-house vendors, software as a service, platform as a service, and then being able to deliver that at cost and at scale.
Yep. So CEO comes to you, Mel, and he says, Mel, I want to take my financial institution and I want to go in that direction, right? We're going to do digital transformation. How long do you strategize about a project like that before you start making decisions? How long are you kind of in, okay, well, what are you talking about, Mr. CEO? What direction do we need to go in? Because that's a very large ocean.
Right. So, and I use this phrase all the time. It's trying to push the Titanic out of the way, right, from the iceberg. Or, sometimes you can't necessarily do that, right? You can't push the but you can probably chip away at the iceberg enough that you can get through it. The problem that I'm seeing with every industry, right? So whether it's financial services, insurance, healthcare, or otherwise, is you've got a ton of tech debt, legacy systems or others, right? And that mindset, and then you've got every new, again, neobank, every new tech startup, every coming in and saying, not only are we doing the collective better and faster, but we're able to continuously deliver on all of those. So when there's a massive change, there has to be a massive investment. There has to be a massive buy-in, again, top down.
Yep.
And digital transformation to me is seriously overhyped, right? Because it's not about a transformation. It's about CIOs, and I've said this in a few other sessions, CIOs learning what the business needs and the business learning what options they have technically, right? And how to get to that, right? So product owners, how to clearly, define what features and sets you want, but also how to create a minimum viable product, right? And I always call it minimum viable effort because I think people understand it. What can we deliver that's of value that requires the least effort, whether it's financial, tools, resources, and to be able to get that out. And then how do we iterate through that? The only way to go through and start chipping away at that iceberg is one little piece at a time, right? And in order to do that, you have to be agile or stay agile or follow methodology that you can deliver every 2 weeks, every 3 months or otherwise. And that's how you're able to pivot when, world events happen like a pandemic, right? And you're able to kind of shift your resources without a lot of loss of whatever you were currently working on and create a new set of priorities, themes, epic features, and everything down, right? And that's first and foremost what you want to do is define, are you able to take this strategizing effort, which others could take 3, 6, 9 months, and kind of break it down into, well, we've got a theme for the year. We want to reduce cost by X. We want to, re-platform to start breaking those down into features. What are the, prioritize them, right? Weighted minimum, and then figure out which ones can we attack from a resource standpoint. Do we need to put more investment in it? Do we buy or build? Those are the strategies that you start to pull in together, and then you have that roadmap. It should not take a very, very, very long time if you want to be in more of an agile mindset. And I know some of the questions that are going to come up is, the simple things like fail fast and, how do we, and all of those come into play with that.
Yep. And I greatly appreciate that. When I have the opportunity to visit with an enterprise type client, rather than boil the ocean, to your point, let's find a minimal viable product. Let's tell a story about it and let's get it stood up as fast as possible. You have a return on investment. You're gaining confidence in that change, in that innovation, and you're moving forward. And then you have something to talk about. So you use some big words: change. Everybody's afraid of change. I've been to trade shows before, and I've wanted a T-shirt that shows me holding like a round wheel, trying to talk to a guy that's pulling a wagon with square wheels, and him saying, "Sorry, we're too busy." Right? So how have you dealt with change in your experiences with the organizations you've represented?
So tying the last two comments that you made together, your comment and the question is, when you want to showcase the benefit of something,
Mhm.
And the ability to be able to do that in a green field or in a new environment where you're trying to inject something,
Yep.
the best way to do it is through a POC, right? It's,
Mhm.
proof of concept. Bring in the developers, bring in, whether it's development innovation session where you kind of pull the ideas, and within a day or two, you've got a slightly working product to showcase. You have to be able to kind of prove what it is that you want to do and the value, right? So when you want to introduce that, you can't, to your point, boil the ocean. You can't say your whole PMO needs to be dropped, everybody needs to be retrained, everybody needs to move over here, we need to restructure. What you have to basically do is define certain key roles at the top and filter that down, make sure that everybody from top down is trained, for example, on the business side to be a product owner. On the development side, you've got to make sure you've got the right mindset for architects, tech leads, scrum masters, and all of the other pieces. Then the rest can flow through. You can take 2, 3, 4, 6 months to be able to make sure that everybody's in tune, having the right systems in place to be able to measure the deliverables and measure the quantifiable, right? So if it's a 2-week sprint or a 3-month program increment, what is the value of what each of those teams is bringing to the table? Were you able to stay on track? What were the learning experiences from that? And then how do we continuously do that, right? So it is really, I will say this 100 million times, I may just write a book about it. It is about the mindset of the culture, right? But it's not culture the way everybody, are you a good fit for the culture? It's really about that mindset is, if you can think in smaller chunks and in the deliverable that rolls up in these smaller chunks into an epic, into a feature, into a theme, then you just have to make sure that you have the right folks assigned to be able to drive those, right? It could be the exact same teams. It just has to be in that mindset.
Yep. And I appreciate that. So with that mindset, I would say you could hush your critics, or you could have a better position to challenge the naysayers, I would argue.
Right, because everybody's accountable. Everybody's an owner, right? So top to bottom, they know what needs to be delivered, because there's a mandate at the top that says 2020, we need to deliver this feature, right? Or sets of features, right? And then the teams have to break that down and then communicate back up of what they've agreed on, right? That can be delivered. And if it's not enough, that's where you start to look for funding and strategy and outsourcing and software as a service, platform as a service, and how do you do the build versus buy strategy components. But without that real top-down kind of cultural piece, you're still going to be in a monolithic mindset. You're still going to be in a legacy mindset. You're still going to be creating those 6 to 12-month plans, right, that are going to be there, right? You can't plan to fund a project. You have to plan to fund very agile, deliverable teams.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Very good.
Yeah.
So I always love the sales process, right? It's sexy, it's glittery, it's fun. It's, this is what tomorrow looks like. Okay, so an organization has made that decision. They've made the change. They've made the purchase. They're in implementation. What do you do when the wheels start to fall off? How do you deal with that? And you could qualify making sure that the vendor can handle that. But how do you deal with that as an organization? Are you like Bruce Lee, be water, my friend, or how have you navigated that in the past?
So depending on where the dam is leaking from, right, is typically where the conversation goes. But I'll give you an example. I have Fun Friday fire drills, right? Because during the week, everything is smooth as silk. And then Friday comes, noon, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, the world exploded and we need to fix something, So, the way I look at it is you have to have the right checkpoints. You have to have the right accountability. And then you have to kind of go through a retrospective with each of the different teams at every layer to make sure that we're addressing things properly. So everything from Did we have enough resources? Did we overcommit? Do we need to make adjustments? So the first month to 3 months becomes really, really, really critical to being able to define that, right? So your velocities and all those other wonderful numbers, but really being able to educate everybody into capacity or otherwise. And I think that's where you can set the guardrails and you can have each team accountable up and across, right? So that everyone knows that there's an interdependency, that you've got, team A, B, and C need to deliver at the same time. So all of the teams need to be able to talk to each other, coordinate with each other, and kind of think about solutions. So it's really, really, it's not easy. I will tell you right now, it is, it's an orchestration masterpiece. If you can always get it right, you're always plugging something. So vendor, no offense to any salesperson out there in the world, will sell you something and it's not true. It's not the right scale. It doesn't have the right integrations or otherwise. You just have to ebb and flow and become water with it and then say, okay, we have a problem. We can fixate on the problem right now, or we can fix the problem and then revisit that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's true. So as CIO extraordinaire, what is the biggest technology or the biggest strategy that you've leveraged in the past 10 years that you've gotten the most value out of? Is it networking? Is it integrations where the integration tools are today? Is it a technology? Is it a platform? Huge question.
Yeah, it's interesting, and I think the best thing that I've been a part of has been probably about 12 years ago or so was just the overall concept of exposing internal code / APIs, programming interfaces out to the world, right? So back, there was Matchery and a bunch of other services before there were, before it became a household name with all of the other vendors that are out there. And it was the ability to be able to enable the business to do something they wanted, which is what came out of it, right? We had internal APIs, the application was built, and they're like, well, we want to create a widget that we can drop in for marketing purposes and kind of get, promote our music and promote our pieces. And then just being able to create the interfaces to expose those and manage the community and manage the onboarding of the different developers really, really opened up my eyes to the potential of enabling the business. So I would say in the last decade to 15 years, just the services, microservices component of literally the whole industry from an innovation and intelligence standpoint have kind of created that. Obviously, for me, I also love e-commerce metrics and metrics on the front end, usability, heat maps, and things like that. And then kind of on the back end of things, on the infrastructure and innovation side, software as a service, platform as a service, infrastructure as a service, the cloud, obviously, disaster recovery. The two combined, it's all these drivers, and being able to implement them throughout the last decade to 15 years has been just insanely rewarding and obviously stressful. But those are the things that, I had hair, back in the day, right? Those are the things that, to me, if I were prioritizing services, microservices, and now, service mesh and all of the other pieces, and the underpinning for all this, which is a personal, like for me, is open source, right? So, and then how do you bridge the gap into, financial institutions, into insurance, into healthcare to leverage some of those pieces?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I appreciate that. I do. So, a couple of parting questions. I always want to ask this of our thought leaders, individuals that have been in the trenches, have survived the battles, have the scars to talk about. What advice would you give to any individuals that were wanting to be in the FI space, in the CIO space, in the technology space? If you were mentoring somebody, what kind of advice would you share with them?
Well, Jeff, I know you know this, but I love mentoring, and I do this actively and at all scales and all industries. And anyone, to me, who is looking to scale up, whether it's technology or any other industry, I take it from my personal experience, and what I say is, X number of years ago, X number of decades ago, I could have become a subject matter expert in a specific networking or a specific platform or a specific language.
Mm-hmm.
I chose to learn across all of those, right? Mm-hmm. So I was not, and I will never say that I'm an expert in anything.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because the second I say I'm an expert in something, somebody's going to prove me wrong with some variant question that I don't know, right?
Yeah.
So knowing enough to be dangerous across the different platforms and knowing what I like to do and focus on that maybe a little bit more has been how I've been able to develop, right? So what I would say is as you're moving forward, right, and I posted this in the past, where, data scientists, data analysts, data architects, are going to be, some of the core folks that are going to work on machine learning, the models, AI, right? If that's not your bag, then find what is, but learn about all of it, right? So become a generalist, right? And when I was about too many years ago, I'll put it a couple of decades ago, my great boss and mentor, he said to me, he's like, Mel, you know what? You do a lot of this, and you do a lot of this, and you do a lot of this, but we have people that do it better, but you do it across the whole system. And, Mel, you're an expert generalist. And at first I was kind of taken back and offended. And then a couple of years later, I started to use that. I'm like, no, I'm an expert generalist. I can find the networking pieces and latency components here. I can look at a database schema and understand the casting and everything else, and I can look at code and follow the logic and actually go through and make sure that pointers and a lot of other pieces are in place. But especially now, I'm not going to be just an R or Python or a React.js developer, right? Yep. But I can easily follow the logic and the stacking and the scaffolding and everything else that may or may not be introduced as part of that.
Fantastic. Well, Mel, it's an honor. I want to do this again. I felt like there were some questions that we could have just gone complete soapbox on for hours and hours and hours.
Absolutely.
We may appreciate that. Our audience may not, But thank you. It is an honor and a privilege.
Thank you.
To our audience that were participating with us today and in attendance today, if you have any questions for myself or for Mel, please feel free to reach out. If Turnkey Lender can be a value for you, a resource for you, or a platform for you, please reach out and visit with us. We're happy to help. We're here to serve.